My daughter announced at my 65th birthday party that she was putting me in a nursing home. My grandchildren laughed and called me a burden. That's when I stood up and told them exactly what their inheritance was really worth. I'm Harold Mitchell, and for 42 years, I drove a bus for the Denver Regional Transit Authority. 42 years of early mornings, late nights, and making sure people got where they needed to go safely. And on the night my family was supposed to celebrate my life, they celebrated getting rid of me. My daughter Sandra thought she was taking control of a confused old man. My son-in-law Greg believed he was finally getting his hands on my modest pension. My grandchildren, Ashley and Brandon, saw their chance to stop pretending they cared about their boring grandfather. But here's what none of them understood. While they'd been treating me like yesterday's newspaper, I'd been quietly building something they couldn't imagine. I smiled, thanked them for their honesty, and pulled out a folder that changed everything. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're from. Because tonight, you're going to learn what happens when patient people decide patience has run its course. Let me take you back to understand how we got here. For 42 years, I drove Route 15 through downtown Denver. Summer heat, winter blizzards, rush hour traffic. I moved people. But somewhere along the way, my family decided that made me invisible. It started small. Sandra would introduce me at her corporate events as my father. He drove buses. Never, he kept Denver moving for 4 decades, or he has a perfect safety record. Just drove buses. Like I was operating a toy instead of a 40,000-pound vehicle carrying 60 lives at a time. Her husband, Greg, picked up on it immediately. He works in finance, whatever that actually means. Something with spreadsheets and conference calls. At family dinners, he'd talk about market trends and investment strategies, then turn to me and ask if I caught the Broncos game. Like that was the only thing my brain could handle. The grandchildren were worse. Ashley, now 24 and working at some marketing agency, perfected the art of checking her phone whenever I spoke. Brandon, 21 and still figuring out college, treated our conversations like community service he was being forced to complete. I overheard him once at Thanksgiving. His girlfriend asked what his grandfather did. Oh, Grandpa Harold? He drove a bus. Not much else going on there. Not much else going on. 42 years of service. 3 commendations for passenger safety. A perfect attendance record that made me a legend at the Transit Authority. But to my own grandson, I was just an old man who drove a bus. But it was the small moments that truly revealed where I stood. Like when Sandra needed a cosigner for her first house. She came to me last, after trying 3 banks that rejected her on income alone. Dad, I know this is probably complicated for someone in your financial situation, but could you help us out? We're desperate. I signed the papers without hesitation. That was 12 years ago. She never asked how I qualified so easily. Or when Greg needed emergency money for a failed investment, $15,000 to cover what he called a temporary setback. He asked me like he was explaining something to a child. Harold, I know you probably don't have this kind of cash lying around, but any amount helps, even a few thousand. I wrote the check that afternoon. He never questioned where it came from. The worst part was watching Sandra feed this narrative to everyone. At holiday gatherings, she'd make jokes about my simple life, how I was happy with my small apartment and my gardening tools, how I didn't need much to be content. Dad doesn't ask for much, she'd say. Give him his TV and his crossword puzzles and he's fine. Like I was a pet that required minimal maintenance. She complained to her friends about my lack of ambition. I heard the phone calls when she didn't realize I was in the next room. He could have done something with his life. Gone to school, gotten a real career. But he was too comfortable just driving that bus. What she didn't know was that I'd been using my bus driver income very strategically. While she worried about my simple needs, I'd been learning about the stock market. While Greg was losing money on flashy investments, I'd been quietly buying dividend stocks in companies I believed in. While they assumed I had nothing, I was building something substantial. My first real investment was $5,000 in a regional grocery chain back in 1992. Bought it when everyone said grocery stores were dying. That investment grew into something most people wouldn't believe, but I never mentioned it. Sandra would have found reasons we needed that money for her children's activities. Greg would have wanted to manage it and probably lose it. So I kept quiet and kept buying. Stock number 2 came in 1995, a small pharmaceutical company nobody had heard of, then a regional bank in 1998, a technology company in 2003 that everyone thought was overvalued. Each one carefully selected, each one generating dividend income, each one completely invisible to my family. They saw me wearing the same jacket for 10 years and assumed that meant poor. They never wondered why I never stressed about money, never questioned how I always had cash when they needed it, even on my supposedly limited pension. The disrespect became routine. Greg would talk about investments at dinner, then pause and say, "No offense, Harold, but this is probably over your head," like I couldn't understand basic finance, while he was the one who lost $15,000 on a sure thing. Sandra treated family visits like obligations. She'd show up, make small talk for exactly 1 hour, then find reasons to leave. When I'd try to talk about anything meaningful, she'd give me the same polite smile she'd give a stranger in an elevator. The grandchildren were even more transparent. Ashley would visit on holidays, take selfies for Instagram, proving she was a good granddaughter, then spend the rest of the time texting. Brandon would ask me the same 3 questions every visit, like he had a script. "How's the weather, Grandpa? Watching any good shows? Taking your vitamins?" Like I was a task to be completed, not a person to be known. I started spending more time at the senior center, not because I needed activities, but because the people there treated me like I mattered. We'd play chess, discuss books, share stories about our careers. Richard, a retired accountant, actually asked me about my investment strategy one day. We talked for 3 hours. My own family had never asked me about anything for 3 hours total. But here's the thing about being underestimated. You notice everything. You listen carefully. You plan thoroughly. By the summer of last year, I could feel something shifting. Sandra started calling more frequently, not to chat, but to ask questions. How was I feeling? Had I thought about the future? Was I having trouble managing things on my own? The questions weren't subtle. She was building a case. Then came the conversation about my apartment. "Maybe it's time to think about something smaller, Dad. Something more manageable. We could help you find a nice community." A nice community. She meant assisted living. She meant somewhere I could be forgotten conveniently. Her husband started sending articles about senior housing options in Arizona. "Great weather," he'd say. "Very affordable. 3 states away from everyone I'd ever known." The grandchildren suddenly became interested in my belongings. Ashley asked about my antique watch collection during Thanksgiving. Brandon wanted to know if I still had Grandma's jewelry. I could have confronted them, could have demanded to know what they were planning, but I'd learned something over the years. Information is more valuable than accusation. So I watched. I listened. I waited. The first real evidence came in January. Sandra accidentally forwarded me an email meant for Greg. The subject line was, "Dad's situation." The email discussed my pension, my apartment, my estimated expenses. They were calculating how much money they'd save by moving me to assisted living. They were estimating how much they'd inherit when I was gone. My own daughter was calculating my death value while I was still alive and healthy. Then came the calls to my doctor. Sandra somehow got herself listed as my emergency contact and started requesting my medical records. She wanted documentation that I was declining, evidence that I needed supervised care. What she didn't know was that my doctor, Jim Brennan, had been my friend for 30 years. He called me immediately. "Harold, your daughter is asking strange questions about your mental state. Everything okay?" I told him what I suspected. He agreed to document everything carefully. The financial investigation was next. Greg started asking about my bank accounts. Had I set up a will? Who was managing my pension? Did I need help with financial decisions? The irony was staggering. While they worried about my pension of $3,200 a month, I was generating $14,000 a month in dividend income. While they planned to put me in a budget nursing home, I could afford the finest private care in Colorado. While they assumed I'd leave them a small apartment and some furniture, my portfolio had grown to something that would shock them. But I needed proof of their intentions, and I knew exactly how to get it. The setup started over dinner in February. I invited Sandra's family for Sunday dinner at my apartment. Nothing special, just the 5 of us like we'd done many times before. but I could feel the undercurrent of anticipation. Sandra brought a casserole. Greg brought a bottle of wine. The grandchildren actually showed up without being threatened. Everyone was being unusually pleasant. "This is nice," Sandra said, arranging her napkin with more precision than necessary, having everyone together. "Yeah," Ashley agreed. "We should do this more often. While we still can." The phrasing was deliberate. While we still can. Like my presence had an expiration date everyone knew about. I set down my fork. "Something on your mind, Sandra?" She exchanged glances with Greg. "Dad, we've been talking. About your future. About what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone?" I repeated. Interesting phrasing. Brandon jumped in. "Grandpa, you've worked so hard for so many years. Driving that bus every day. You deserve to relax." "I am relaxed, but in a real way," Ashley added. "Somewhere with activities. And people to take care of you. People to take care of me. Like nurses. In a facility." "Dad," Greg said carefully, "we've been researching some wonderful communities. Places where you'd have everything you need. Everything I need except my independence." The table went silent. Sandra tried again. "We're just thinking about your safety, Dad. You're getting older. Things happen." "What things?" "Falls. Confusion. Medical emergencies. What if something happened and no one was here?" I nodded slowly. "So, you're suggesting I give up my apartment, move somewhere supervised, because I might fall someday." "When you put it that way, it sounds harsh," Greg said. "But it's responsible planning." "Responsible planning," I repeated. "For whom?" Greg's expression flickered. "For everyone, Dad. For you, for us, for the kids." "For the kids? Ashley and Brandon need me in a nursing home for their benefit?" No one answered. I leaned back in my chair. "Let me ask you something, Sandra. When I co-signed for your house 12 years ago, did the bank have any concerns about my financial stability?" She looked confused. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Did they have concerns?" "No, they approved it immediately." "And Greg, when you needed $15,000 for your investment emergency, where did you think that money came from?" Your savings, I guess." "A bus driver's savings. For $15,000. On demand." He shifted uncomfortably. "I assumed you'd been putting money aside. For 40 years, on a bus driver's salary. And I could still produce $15,000 instantly." "Dad," Sandra said carefully, "what are you getting at?" "I'm getting at the fact that none of you have ever asked what I do with my money. You've made assumptions. You've calculated what you think I'm worth. But you've never actually asked." My phone buzzed. I glanced at it and smiled. Perfect timing. "What is it?" Greg asked. "My quarterly dividend statement just posted. $41,000 deposited this morning." The confusion on their faces was beautiful. "I'm sorry, what?" Sandra asked. $41,000. Quarterly dividend payment from my investment portfolio. That's in addition to my pension." Greg actually laughed. "Dad, that's impossible." "You drove a bus." "I did drive a bus. I also invested my money carefully for 40 years. Would you like to know what that looks like?" The silence told me they weren't ready. But I continued anyway. "My current portfolio is valued at approximately $2.4 million. I own significant positions in 7 different companies, all of which pay quarterly dividends. My annual passive income exceeds $160,000. I could buy a nursing home, not live in one." Sandra's face went through several colors. "Dad, this isn't possible." "Why isn't it possible?" "Because you're a bus driver." I was a bus driver. I was also someone who lived below his means, studied the market religiously, and reinvested every dividend for 4 decades. "Do you have any idea what compound interest does over 40 years? Greg was doing math on his phone, his hands visibly shaking. "But we thought you never said anything. You never asked. You were too busy being embarrassed by my career to wonder if I understood money. You were too busy assuming I was simple to consider I might be strategic." My phone rang. "My financial advisor, Catherine Chen." I answered. "Mr. Mitchell, excellent news. The pharmaceutical stock split went through. Your position is now worth approximately $380,000. "Thank you, Catherine." I'll review the details tomorrow. I hung up and looked around the table at my daughter, who was calculating my death value 3 months ago, at my son-in-law, who thought finance was too complicated for me to understand, at my grandchildren, who visited out of obligation and checked their phones while I talked. Still think I need a nursing home? The birthday party was scheduled for March 15th at the community center. Sandra had insisted on organizing it herself. "Let me handle everything, Dad. It's the least I can do." At the time, I thought she was being thoughtful. After the February dinner revelation, I knew she was recalculating. The venue was nice. Probably 60 people, neighbors, former co-workers from the transit authority, Sandra's colleagues who'd been invited to impress, even some faces I hadn't seen in years. The party started well enough. My old supervisor from the transit authority, Mike Patterson, gave a speech about my record: 42 years, 3 million miles, 0 at-fault accidents. Harold Mitchell is the guy you want driving when the roads get bad. Reliable as sunrise. People applauded, told stories, shared memories of rides they'd taken on my route. I felt appreciated for the first time in years around my family. Sandra mingled with the crowd, playing the devoted daughter perfectly. She'd even made a slideshow of photos from my career, old pictures of me in uniform, awards ceremonies, retirement celebration from last year. "My father has given so much," people kept saying. "You must be so proud of him." If only they knew what she'd been planning a month ago. The cake cutting went normally. Standard birthday stuff. 65 candles. People making jokes about me getting old. Then Sandra stood up to make her speech. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began. "My father has worked so hard for so many years. He deserves to be celebrated." Applause, smiles, everyone thinking this was a normal, loving tribute. "Being his daughter hasn't always been easy," she continued. "Dad was gone early, home late, driving that bus 7 days a week sometimes. It took a toll on all of us. The shift in tone was subtle, but I caught it. But Dad always came home. He always provided. He always did his best with what he had. With what he had, the past tense wasn't accidental, which is why," she continued, "this felt like the right time to make an announcement." The room went quiet. This wasn't on the program. After 65 years of Dad taking care of himself, we think it's time for him to be taken care of. Greg and I have found a wonderful assisted living community in Arizona. Beautiful weather, excellent care, and the perfect place for Dad to relax into his golden years. People looked confused. Assisted living? Arizona? Sandra was smiling, but there was calculation behind her eyes. "We've already put down a deposit," Greg added. "The move-in date is April 1st. Murmurs spread through the crowd. This seemed sudden, planned without my input. Ashley stepped forward. "We just want what's best for Grandpa. He's been alone too long," Brandon agreed. "He needs professional care." Then Brandon said the words that sealed everything. "Honestly, this is kind of a relief for all of us. It's been a burden worrying about him all the time. A burden. My own grandson called me a burden at my birthday party." Ashley laughed nervously. "Finally, we can stop pretending everything's fine." The crowd was stunned. People who'd known our family for years watched my grandchildren talk about me like I was a problem being solved. The silence stretched. Then I stood up. "Sandra," I said calmly. "Greg, Ashley, Brandon, thank you for your honesty. I really mean that." Sandra looked relieved. "Dad, we knew you'd understand." "I'm not finished." The room went dead quiet. "Since we're being honest in front of all these people, maybe I should be honest too." "Dad," Sandra warned, "this isn't the place. This is exactly the place. You just announced you're putting me in a nursing home at my own birthday party. I think honesty is appropriate." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folder. A month ago, Sandra forwarded me an email by mistake. An email where she and Greg calculated my death value, what my pension and apartment would be worth when I was gone. Gasps around the room. They estimated I had perhaps $80,000 in total assets. They calculated how much they'd save by putting me in budget assisted living. They discussed which of my belongings they wanted. Sandra went pale. "Dad," that was taken out of context. What context makes calculating your father's death value acceptable? I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. I've been meaning to share some information with my family. Since they decided to make public announcements today, I think I'll do the same. My investment portfolio, valued at $2.4 million as of this morning. I held up the statement for everyone to see. My quarterly dividend payments, $41,000 every 3 months. That's $164,000 annually in passive income alone. Second document. I own significant positions in pharmaceutical companies, regional banks, and technology firms. I've been investing since 1992. 32 years of compound growth. The crowd was buzzing now. People pulling out phones, former co-workers exchanging looks. Greg tried to speak. Harold, we had no idea. You had no idea because you never asked. You were too busy explaining investments to me at dinner while I sat there with more money than you'll ever manage. My phone rang. I answered it, not caring about the timing. Mr. Mitchell, it's Catherine Chen. Just wanted to confirm you received the quarterly statement. I did, Catherine, thank you. Actually, since I have you, can you tell me the current total value of my portfolio? Certainly. As of market close today, your combined holdings are valued at $2,412,847. Your projected annual dividend income is $164,200. Thank you, Catherine. I'll call you next week. I hung up and looked at Sandra. A nursing home in Arizona costs approximately $6,000 a month. I generate $13,700 a month in dividend income alone. I could buy that nursing home. Sandra was crying now. Daddy, we didn't know. We were trying to help. You were trying to manage me, to warehouse me somewhere convenient so you wouldn't have to worry about the burden of my existence. Mike Patterson was shaking his head in amazement. Harold, you magnificent son of a gun, you've been building an empire while driving that bus. I was driving the bus, I agreed. That was my passion. The investing was just common sense. I looked around the room. 60 people who'd come to celebrate my birthday, now witnessing my family's complete humiliation. Here's what's going to happen, I said. Nobody is putting me anywhere. I live where I choose. I do what I choose. I'm not confused, declining, or in need of supervision. I'm a 65-year-old man with $2.4 million in assets and the mental clarity to manage every penny of it. I turned to my grandchildren. Ashley, Brandon, you called me a burden tonight. You said taking care of me was an obligation you were relieved to end. I want you to remember those words. Grandpa, Ashley started. We didn't mean. You meant every word. I could see it in your faces. The relief. Finally getting rid of the embarrassing old man who drove a bus. I put the folder back in my jacket. My will currently leaves everything to charity. Every dollar, every stock, every dividend payment. Unless something changes dramatically in how this family treats me, that's exactly where my money will go. Dad, Sandra pleaded. We can fix this. We can start over. You can try. But I'm not interested in people who love my money. I'm interested in people who respect me as a person. I picked up my jacket and headed toward the door. Harold, wait, Greg called. We should talk about this. We've talked, Greg. For years, you've explained investments to me like I was a child. For years, Sandra has been embarrassed by my career. For years, my grandchildren have visited out of obligation and counted the minutes until they could leave. I paused at the doorway. The bus route I drove for 40 years connected the poorest neighborhood in Denver to the financial district. Every day, I watched people get on that bus with nothing and get off at jobs that would change their lives. I moved people toward opportunity. That mattered. Even if you never understood it. I walked out of my own birthday party. The best decision I ever made. The next 3 months were educational for everyone. Sandra's calls started immediately. Daily at first, then multiple times per day. Daddy, please let us explain. We were scared for you. We didn't understand. I answered occasionally, listened, evaluated. What scared you, Sandra? You seemed lonely, isolated. We worried. You worried about a man who volunteers at the senior center 3 times a week, who plays chess every Thursday, Who has dinner with friends every weekend? We didn't know about all that. You never asked. Greg's approach was different. He wanted to discuss investments. Harold, I'd love to pick your brain about your strategy. Maybe we could collaborate. Collaborate. After 20 years of explaining simple concepts to me like I was a child, now he wanted to collaborate. The grandchildren tried next. Ashley sent a handwritten letter. 4 pages about how wrong she'd been, how she never appreciated what I'd accomplished, how driving a bus was important, meaningful work. It was well written, almost too well written. I could see her marketing background in every carefully crafted sentence. Brandon showed up at my apartment one afternoon. Grandpa, can we talk? I let him in, made coffee, waited. I've been thinking a lot since your birthday, he said. About what you said. About how we treated you. And I was ashamed of you. He looked down at his cup. Not because you drove a bus. Because I didn't understand what that meant. What do you think it meant? You showed up every day. For 42 years. In snow, in heat, in traffic. You kept showing up. I've never done anything that consistently in my life. That was more honest than I expected. Brandon, what do you want to do with your life? I don't know. That's the problem. I've been in college for 3 years and I still don't know. What interests you? He hesitated. Working with my hands. Building things. But Dad says that's not a real career. Your father manages spreadsheets. I drove a bus. Which one of us is worth $2.4 million? He almost smiled. Fair point. I looked at my grandson. Really looked at him for the first time in years. If you want to learn a trade, I'll support that. Not financially. I mean, I'll respect that choice when your parents don't. Why would you do that? Because people who work with their hands understand something important. You can't fake competence when you're building a house or fixing an engine. Either it works or it doesn't. He nodded slowly. Grandpa, I'm sorry. For everything. The phone checking, the fake visits, the burden comment. All of it. I know. Can we start over? We can try. That was 4 months ago. Today, Brandon is enrolled in a carpentry apprenticeship program. He works with his hands every day and loves it. His parents hate the decision, but I told them their opinion doesn't matter. He visits me every Sunday now. Real visits. We talk for hours. He asks about my life, my investments, my philosophy. He shares his projects, his challenges, his small victories. Last week, he showed me a cabinet he built. Beautiful work, precise joints, quality craftsmanship. Not bad for someone pursuing a real career, I told him. He laughed. First genuine laugh I'd heard from him in years. Ashley's transformation took longer. She apologized formally, professionally, like she was handling a client complaint. Then she apologized again, messier, more honest. Grandpa, I was so focused on what looked good that I forgot what was good, posting pictures of family visits for Instagram while ignoring the actual family member in front of me. What made you realize that? Your birthday party. Watching you walk out. You weren't angry. You were just done. That was worse somehow. She started visiting without her phone. Sitting, talking, listening, asking questions about my investments, not because she wanted money, but because she wanted to understand. How did you know which stocks to buy? I read. Everything. Annual reports, financial news, industry analysis. For 40 years, I treated learning like a second job. While driving a bus full-time, 6 hours of driving meant 6 hours of audiobooks, market analysis, investment strategy, business biographies. My bus had the best educated driver in Denver. She shook her head. We had no idea. You saw what you expected to see. A simple man with simple needs. We were wrong. Yes, but you can be less wrong going forward. Sandra was the hardest. The betrayal ran deepest with her. My own daughter calculating my death value, planning to warehouse me in budget-assisted living while hoping I'd die quickly enough to leave her something. But she tried. Genuine effort. Weekly dinners where she asked about my life instead of managing it. Conversations where she listened instead of planned. One night, over dinner at her house, she finally broke down. Daddy, I'm so ashamed of how I treated you, of what I was planning, of everything. What were you planning? Exactly. I wanted her to say it. We were going to put you in the cheapest assisted living we could find. We figured you'd be gone in a few years. We were waiting for you to die so we could inherit whatever scraps you had. She was sobbing now. I thought I was protecting my family's future. I didn't realize I was destroying my family's present. I let her cry. Didn't comfort her. She needed to feel this. Sandra, I'm not going to pretend everything is fine. Trust takes time to rebuild. But I'm willing to try if you are. I'm willing. Whatever it takes. Greg's redemption was more complicated. He'd spent 20 years positioning himself as the financial expert in the family. Discovering that his bus-driving father-in-law had outperformed him by approximately 400% was humbling. Harold, he said one evening, I owe you an apology. Not just for the nursing home thing, for 20 years of condescension. That surprised me. Go on. I treated you like you were incapable of understanding finance. While you were quietly building a portfolio I couldn't match with a finance degree and 30 years of professional experience. Why do you think that happened? Because I needed to feel superior. My career hasn't gone where I wanted. My investments haven't performed well. Looking down on you made me feel better about my own failures. That was more self-awareness than I expected from Greg. Can you stop? I'm trying. It's harder than I expected. Old habits. Keep trying. He has. The condescension has faded. He asks questions now, instead of explaining things. He admits when he doesn't understand something. Small changes, but real ones. Last month, I restructured my will, not because my family deserved it, because they were trying to deserve it. Effort matters. Growth matters. Change matters. Brandon gets a trust fund for his carpentry business. Not enough to make him lazy, but enough to get started properly. He has to build something real before he gets the rest. Ashley gets funding for continuing education. She wants to understand investments now. Really understand them. I'll pay for her to learn properly. Sandra and Greg get an inheritance, but with conditions. They have to volunteer for 2 years at organizations that serve elderly people. They have to understand what they were planning to do to me by meeting people who actually need that kind of care. The charitable donations remain. Substantial portions to trade schools, apprenticeship programs, and organizations that help working-class families build wealth. The people who understood the value of showing up every day. My grandchildren asked me recently what the most important thing I learned from 42 years of driving a bus. Consistency, I told them. Showing up matters more than showing off. I never had a big moment. No dramatic breakthrough. I just invested a little bit every paycheck for 40 years. That's it? Brandon asked. Just keep showing up? Just keep showing up. In work, in learning, in relationships. The people who win aren't the ones who make the biggest moves. They're the ones who make small moves consistently over long periods of time. Ashley wrote that down. She's collecting my advice now. Says she wants to remember it. Sandra asked me something else. Did you ever doubt yourself? All those years of us being embarrassed by your work? Every day, I admitted. I wondered if I'd made a mistake. If I should have gotten a different job. A more impressive title. But then I'd see the numbers in my portfolio and remember that results matter more than perception. We should have seen those results. You saw what you wanted to see. A father who drove a bus. A grandfather who lived simply. An old man who needed to be managed. And now? Now you see a person. Finally, after 65 years, the senior center where I volunteer threw me a party last week. A real celebration from people who appreciate what I offer. We played chess, shared stories, laughed about the absurdity of life. Richard, my accountant friend, raised a toast. To Harold, the man who proved that quiet competence beats loud incompetence every time. I thought about my birthday party, the nursing home announcement, the burden comment, the relief on my grandchildren's faces. Then I thought about now, Brandon visiting every Sunday, Ashley asking genuine questions, Sandra making real effort, even Greg showing humility. People can change. Not always, not easily. But sometimes, When they're forced to see clearly, they choose to become better. My family chose better. Eventually, if you're watching this, let me know where you're from. And remember, patient people aren't passive people. Sometimes we're just waiting for the right moment to reveal what patience has built.